and welcome to part 2, really part 3 actually, of my bookshelf tour, the second half of my second bookshelf. Today we have pumpkin apple melting here, and maybe to start I'll also show you what else I have here on this side table. We have this delightfully macabre candle shaped like a skull. The wick is in the center here, and it burns down, and it ended up coming out of the eyes, which I thought was really, really nice. It sort of hit a lull where it didn't melt as much as I wanted around the cranium, but he looks great. Call him Yorick. And then back here, hiding away, is a little ceramic planter, actually, that I painted or glazed at a local pottery shop. And I use it to hold my bookmarks. So a lot of these are just scrap fabric ribbon, old bookmarks from when I was a kid, from many scholastic book fairs. So they sit in this little dish. So we'll move on to our next shelf. And pardon the noise, hope it's not too loud for you. There's always background noise, it's hard to avoid. So our next shelf here is my fantasy shelf. So we'll start, I do have to get on the floor for this, unfortunately. We'll start over here. So just make sure I have room here to talk about these. So first we have a fly buzzing around. They like my plants, so they're a little hard to get rid of. But we have a little plush TARDIS keychain and a little Dalek. These I got in high school from a friend who was like me, very into Doctor Who. So in front of that we have my lone science fiction novel here, Bonds of Brass. So this is a book that I believe was inspired by Star Wars in some ways. I think it's inspired by Poe Dameron and Finn from the sequel trilogy, so from The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. I believe this came out between the two movies. I don't recall if it's a series. I'll be honest, still haven't read it. Like a few books here. Most of this is my TBR, I'll be honest, but so it's a science fiction book about a pilot and a prince. Very interesting, definitely. I'd show you the cover, but I can't quite pull it out. But it's distinctly inspired by characters from the Star Wars movies. You can kind of tell. So, beside that, we have my Welcome to Night Vale novel. This novel is based on a narrative podcast called Welcome to Night Vale. Another one that I was, I think, listening to in late high school, early university. So it's about a surreal town in a desert. Is a desert town as it's described, I think, in the podcast. And so in this town, there are odd disturbances that are considered the norm for them. So it's a bit of a surreal science fiction fantasy sort of story. It has government conspiracy, supernatural, that sort of thing. So it's very offbeat. It reminds me a little bit of Twin Peaks in that way. I'd say Twin Peaks is more, what's a good word? More dreamlike. Night Vale is more it has a dreamlike quality too, but in a more, what's a good way to describe it? It's a bit more conspiracy-y than Twin Peaks. Twin Peaks is more of the mind in a lot of ways, where like what is real and what isn't is more, you know, dealing with souls and maybe things like that, where this is much more things are going on that are not of this world in a different way. So beside that, we have The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. So that's a fantasy novel about dragons, and that's basically all I know. This is a gift from one of my friends who loved this book, so she got it for me as a birthday present, and I still have not read it, but someday. Beside that, we have The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. So this is a retelling of the Trojan War. So it's about Achilles and about, I want to say Patroclus is his name, but I could be wrong. Let's take a look. Oop, knocked over some books there. So Achilles and who is it? Patroclus. So it's about Achilles and Patroclus, who are, to my knowledge, best friends and fighting in the Trojan War together. And maybe they're a little bit more than friends. So this explores the myth and explores their relationship. And it's one I've heard a lot about. Years and years ago, it was quite popular online, and I think it's maintained a lot of that popularity. I've definitely seen it talked about on BookTube and Book Talk and all of that. So, also one I've heard is devastating and very sad. And if you know the story of Achilles, you know it doesn't end well for him. So, one you have to, I think, be ready for. So beside that, we have Sarah Waters' Fingersmith. So this is one that I've started and I've heard great things about from various people online, friends, and I know it is the basis of the film The Handmaiden. I think it's by Park Chan-wook. So different settings for those two, for the film and for this book, but as far as I know, very, very much the same story for the most part. So let's read a little bit about this. London, 1862. Sue Trinder, orphaned at birth, grows up among petty thieves, fingersmiths, under the rough but loving care of Mrs. Suxby and her family. One day, gentleman, an elegant con man, arrives with a proposition for Sue. If she works as a maid to Maud Lily, a gentlewoman, and aids gentlemen in her seduction, they will share in Maud's vast inheritance. With dreams of repaying her adopted father, Sue agrees to the plan. Once in, however, Sue begins to pity Maud and care for her in unexpected ways. But nothing is as it seems in this Dickensian novel of thrills and reversals. So it's a story about cons. It's a story about seduction in, I guess, different ways. I've been avoiding watching The Handmaiden because I do want to read this first. But one day we'll get there. And so if you know anything about Sarah Waters' writing, you might know at least somewhat about what occurs here. I don't want to say too much. So beside that, we have this novel by Allons-y Blake. So Allons-y Blake is an author who actually started in fan fiction. She wrote a lot of Hermione Draco fan fiction. And she's since published a lot of her original work. So this is one, Masters of Death. Really interesting premise. There's vampires, death is a character, there's bargaining, curses. Really, really interesting. It seems very fun, you know? And then beside that, we have Allons-y Blake's The Atlas Six. So this is a dark academia genre, I would say, and it is a part of a trilogy. Now, I'll be honest, for anything I've seen by Allons-y Blake, I love the premise. I love the ideas at play. However, something always kind of stalls me when I start reading. And I think I realized that it might be the pagination and the, well, maybe not necessarily pagination. It's the margins and the layout of the text. I find whoever does the typesetting for these books, I think the line spacing is too close together and it makes it feel too dense for me, and I find it harder to read because of it. I don't know what that's about, but it puts me off. So something about this size font on this width paper with these margins is troublesome for me. So I don't know. Let me know what you think. When I look at this, it looks like a wall of text. Like I don't see enough paragraph breaks. The line spacing is too close. I don't know. So just one of those things that, I don't know if that's from the, usually Tor I think is okay as a publisher. I might compare it to some other Tor novels I have and see if I have if I notice something similar, or if it's just these. It's funny when you start getting really into reading and into buying books, and when you get into specific authors, you'll notice more and more the publishers and what publishers tend to put out books that align with your tastes. It's kind of funny. Okay, beside that, we have What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. So this is a really, really interesting novella, I believe. I don't think it's actually a full novel. That is a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. In this case, it takes on a different horror twist that involves mushrooms. So I think if you're a fan of The Last of Us, the HBO show, or the video game, I think this might appeal to your interests. Really interesting take on the short story it adapts. And I would definitely look at more by T. Kingfisher. There's some other books by them that are on my list. So yeah, really, really good spooky novella. Beside that, we have The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. So this is a novel about two essentially feuding magicians. So I don't entirely remember the vast majority of the plot. Like, I know the big picture, but essentially, and I don't remember names, but she's raised to sort of be the best of the best, and from a young age they're pitted against each other. They're lifelong rivals, and they compete magically at what's known as the Night Circus. So they're competing to put on better spectacles at this circus, and it has a lot of magic. And so they're rivals in this, or are they more than that? So it's definitely an enemies to lovers kind of vibe, but beautifully written, and it's really, really lovely story. So beside that, we have another novel by Erin Morgenstern called The Starless Sea. It's another one that's on my TBR here. And I don't know a ton about it besides pirates. I believe that's the gist of what I recall about the description, but I think it's about storytelling and sort of similarly magic and discovering other worlds. So a lot of fun. Beside that, we have Wild and Wicked Things by Francesca May. So this is a 1920s set supernatural fantasy. It's about witches and about mystery. So this is still in my TBR section here, but beautiful, beautiful cover with the gold reflective aspects. And beside that, let me just fix these guys. Beside that, we have, sorry, just let me make sure we had a good group view here. We have Immortal Dark by Tigis Takurma. I believe I'm saying that right. I might have to double check that. So this is a a bit of a dark academia novel, actually. I might have to put it with my others, but more on the fantasy side of that. So this is about a young woman who escaped a life of being beholden to vampires. So in this world, there are these powerful families that are sort of in league with vampires. So the vampires can only feed off of those in one of these powerful families. They basically pledge to these families. That's who they're devoted to. They each kind of have their own power, or their own area that they focus in. So she's escaped that life, but then her twin sister goes missing, and she's convinced that she saw her sister leave with a vampire. But no one else considers her sister missing because a bag was packed. It seemed premeditated. It did not seem like a kidnapping. So she goes back to this place that she'd escaped as a young child. You know, these two girls, they were orphaned and raised by, I don't know if they're raised by a biological aunt or just a woman that they call aunt. But they leave that place. She then has to go back because she thinks that's where her sister is. And because they have an inheritance there. And so, for her to claim that inheritance, she has to live in the home, her ancestral home, but her family vampire is also trying to claim that inheritance, so they have to live together. And so there's a lot of mystery, because she's looking for her sister, and there's a lot to uncover about this world that she knows very little about. She thinks she knows, but she doesn't. And that we as readers don't know about. So it's a really, really good kind of gothic, slow burn. And I think it's really, really fun novel. Probably my favorite book I read this year. And it's the beginning of a series. So this just came out in September, and more books to come. So really looking forward to more from this. Beside that, we have another dark academia fantasy. This is A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. So this is also the author of two of my other favorite books, Spinning Silver and Uprooted. This one, I know early on, I think had some controversy about how some characters were depicted, but generally I've heard positive things about the series. It's still one that's on my TBR here, but I have a friend who read it and said it was a lot of fun, so one I'll get to eventually. And beside that, we have Our Crooked Hearts by Melissa Albert. This is one about a young woman and about her mother, and they a family of magic. And so it sort of contrasts two timelines, the present day with our main character and the past with her mother. So really interesting, has some mystery elements, has some fantasy and witchcraft. One I'm looking forward to digging into eventually. And then another witchy book here, The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. I don't know a ton about this one. At least I don't recall. It's one that was recommended to me by a friend. So let's take a look. A young woman living in a rigid, puritanical society discovers dark powers within herself in this stunning feminist fantasy debut. In the lands of Bethel, where the prophet's word is law, Emmanuelle Moore's very existence is blasphemy. Her mother's union with an outsider of a different race cast her once proud family into disgrace. So Emmanuelle does her best to worship the Father, follow holy protocol, and lead a life of submission, devotion, and absolute conformity, like all the other women in the settlement. But a mishap lures her into the forbidden dark woods surrounding Bethel, where the first prophet once chased and killed 4 powerful witches. Their spirits are still lurking there, and they bestow a gift on Emmanuelle, the journal of her dead mother, who Emmanuelle is shocked to learn once sought sanctuary in the wood. Fascinated by the secrets in the diary, Emmanuelle finds herself struggling to understand how her mother could have consorted with the witches. But when she begins to learn the grim truths about the church and its history, she realizes the true threat to Bethel is its own darkness. and she starts to understand that if Bethel is to change, it must begin with her. So really spooky, gothic kind of vibe to this. Really, really intriguing premise, and I'm excited for this one. I think this would have been a good one for the fall, but maybe next time. And then we have a little plant here. It's a little tiny succulent that we're going to move out of the way. Sort of losing some stems there, but I think he's doing okay. He's lasted me a couple years now. And I like this planter. It reminds me of mint chocolate chip ice cream. So, continue on here. This is The War in the Dark, which is a sort of supernatural procedural mystery kind of vibe. So, also has some, I think, other kind of religious undertones. Europe, 1963. And the true Cold War is fought on the borders of this world at the edges of the light. I love a Cold War story, I'm going to be honest. When the assassination of a traitor trading with the enemy goes terribly wrong, British intelligence agent Christopher Winter must flee London. In a tense alliance with a lethal, mysterious woman named Karina Lazarova, he's caught in a quest of hidden knowledge from centuries before. An occult secret written in the language of fire, a secret that will give supremacy to the nation that possesses it. Racing against the Russians, the chase takes them from the demon-haunted Hungarian border to treasure-laden tunnels beneath Berlin, from an impossible house in Vienna to a bomb-blasted ruin in Bavaria where something unholy waits, born of the power of white fire and black glass. It's a world of treachery, blood, and magic, a world at war in the dark. So it kind of gives me almost a Da Vinci Code kind of vibe, with the kind of occult secrets and that sort of thing. So one that seems like a fun time. Someday I'll read it. And now we get into some books I have read. Okay, sometimes I read. I don't just collect them. The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. So this is a book told from the perspective of death, about not necessarily about the Holocaust, but set during the Holocaust in World War II. So a young German girl in a small kind of German village, dealing with Nazi Germany. Essentially she lives in a town, and her, I believe, grandparents, I could be wrong, I think it's her grandparents, take in a Jewish man who lives in a crawl space. Yeah, here we are. Oh no, foster family. Her foster family hides a Jew in their basement, and sort of explores that relationship. It's there's a lot of sad stuff here, but it's also very hopeful. And it's just a really, really lovely story, and I highly recommend it. It sort of shows, especially in that setting, at a time where Nazis were burning books. It talks a lot about the power of books, and for the young girl in this novel, what books and reading mean for her, and how she starts stealing books and she becomes the book thief. So next we have Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. So I'm a big fan of the film, the Studio Ghibli movie, and this novel is fairly different, but a lot of the core elements are still here, and just a really, really fun, kind of wacky fantasy novel, and it's very cute. Next we have The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy. So this is kind of an odd, how to describe it? It's an odd fantasy romance. The world that it exists in is hard for me to even completely understand, let alone explain. It sort of has a frontier cowboy vibe, and yet is very fantasy driven in an odd way. So in this novel, Mercy is a undertaker. It's a family business, but it's not as straightforward as simply putting bodies in caskets and burying them. There's like rituals around how they deal with bodies, because at the outskirts of the town, unaccounted for or unproperly dealt with bodies kind of get taken over by spirits, I suppose, and sort of become zombie-like. So the world building is kind of strange, but it's, if you kind of think of it as like an old frontier cowboy kind of story, that can help if you're sort of taken aback by, I don't know what they're talking about. So that's her role, and he is a not a sheriff. What's the word for it? A marshal, and he patrols the strange and magical wilds. So that's his job, is sort of ensure that any corrupt bodies are dealt with. And so there's a bit of a forced proximity where he constantly has to bring these bodies into Mercy as the Undertaker, but they don't get along. And so then it plays with a sort of a you've got mail, shop around the corner premise, where they are writing letters to each other but don't realize it's to each other. So there's sort of a magical interference there, because I believe Hart is the one sending the first letter, and he just writes to a friend. He's putting it out into the world. He just needs to vent, and he decides inexplicably to mail this letter, thinking nothing of it, but it ends up in Mercy's hands, and she writes back. So they don't realize they're writing to each other. And it's a very, very sweet story. It's very cute. And I recommend, if you want just a very fun, sort of enemies to lovers style, light romance. So we'll put that up there. And then beside that, we have The Princess Bride by William Goldman. So I'm a lifelong fan of the movie The Princess Bride, but I never read the book. And so a year or two ago, I don't know if I bought it for myself, got it as a gift, I don't remember, but I read it. And it's very odd how much William Goldman sort of inserts himself as the author into this novel. The premise of him writing it, the idea of it is that he claims, oh, this is a story retold to me by my father, and it's lost and I'm rewriting it, kind of thing. It's a complete fiction. He wrote this whole thing himself. It's not based on any other story. So all that to say, it's just kind of an odd reading experience when so much of him writing it is him writing about him writing it. It's kind of odd to explain. But the core of the story is pretty much the exact same as the movie. He also wrote the screenplay for the film. I think the film is better, if only because it trims some of that fat, and feels more natural as a retelling in the film. If you recall, the book ending of it is the grandfather telling the story to his grandson. I think that works better in film than here as a real life kind of retelling. But anyway, lovely, lovely story. It's sort of fun to read the novels that some of your favorite movies are based on, because they can be so different yet be so the same. But yeah, a lot of fun. So I think if you're a fan of the movie, I'd recommend checking out the book, just even for the sake of kind of seeing its origins. Okay, we'll put our plant back up here as well. Keep them safe. Okay, so now we're getting down here into a bit of a more shadowy area, because my side table blocks a bit of light, but that is okay. I'm going to try and sit comfortably here. My foot's fallen asleep, so we'll deal with that. But down in the corner here, we have these 3 novels. So we have A Great and Terrible Beauty by Libba Bray. This is a trilogy. We're getting more into the YA section here. So this is a book that one of my best friends got me as a gift. This is a series she really liked and recommended, so I got into these books from her. And they are I think they're set in the Victorian period, but I could be wrong. It's been a long time since I read them. I tend to, with books like these, sometimes hold on to them more for nostalgia than anything, but this is the Gemma Doyle trilogy. So let's read a little bit about it. It's been a long time. Gemma Doyle isn't like other girls. It's funny reading that now, knowing how much of a A cliche that is now, but anyway. Gemma Doyle isn't like other girls. Girls with impeccable manners, who speak when spoken to, who remember their station, and who will lie back and think of England when it's required of them. No, 16-year-old Gemma is an island unto herself, sent to the Spence Academy in London after tragedy strikes her family in India. Lonely, guilt-ridden, and prone to visions of the future that have uncomfortable habit of coming true, Gemma finds a chilly reception. But she's not completely alone. She's been followed by a mysterious young man who warns her to close her mind against the visions. For it's at Spence that Gemma's powers to attract the supernatural unfolds. There she becomes entangled with the school's most powerful girls and discovers her mother's connection to a shadowy group called the Order. It's there that her destiny waits, if only she can believe in it. A Great and Terrible Beauty is a curl-up-under-the-covers kind of book, a vast canvas of rustling skirts and dancing shadows and things that go bump in the night. It's a vividly drawn portrait of the Victorian age, when girls were groomed for lives as rich men's wives, and the story of a girl who saw another way. So yeah, for a YA novel, I think it definitely explores a lot of topics that I don't know are explored as much in young adult, but really interesting story. So it's about magic. It's about kind of society at that time, sort of the upper crust Victorian society and women's roles in that. Yeah, I remember really enjoying it. I think it sort of got a little out there for me as it went on, but generally really, really great series that I'd recommend checking out if you're interested in that kind of genre. Beside that, we have two other Libba Bray novels, and I'm missing one here that's once more in my TBR kind of pile closer to where I choose to sit and read. But first we have The Diviners by Libba Bray. So for a very, very long time, this was definitely my favorite book, and certainly my favorite Libba Bray book. So it's set in New York in the 1920s. It follows a group of people, collectively known as the Diviners, but they don't necessarily all self-identify together as a group. Essentially, Diviners are people with supernatural abilities. So our main character, I think it's Effie or Evie or Evie. I think it's Evie. She is from, I think, Illinois? Where is she from? Wherever Bennington is. She's from more of a rural area, and she has the ability to read objects. So if you give her an object, she can tell you something about the person who owned it, something about where that object is from. And she, at first, I believe, tries to kind of deny that power, but eventually sort of finds power in it as more of a celebrity function. Oh, I didn't notice it's peeling. Oh, how sad. Yeah, she kind of wants to celebrate the celebrity that gives her, but also is a little bit hesitant to use that power for anything beyond a I know, sort of a hokey trick to attract attention. So the real main plot of this is that there is a ghost, a killer ghost, who I believe something about the Hat Man comes to mind. I've forgotten a lot of things about this, but there's a lot of supernatural things happening. She goes to New York to live with her uncle, who runs a museum about the supernatural and the occult and the unexplained. And it also follows, it's multi-point of view, and follows some other folks in New York who are like Evie and have abilities. Some more willing to share those abilities than others, and how their paths cross. And how they come together to try and resolve the mysteries at play. So it is a series. The first book is The Diviners, followed by Layer of Dreams. And then there are, I believe, two more novels. I believe I have one more, and then one that I never got around to purchasing, but someday I will finish this series. They're very good. They're sort of a horror elements at play, so there's a lot of mystery and unexplained and spooky, scary murders by ghosts. So it's a lot of fun. And I love the setting. I love the 1920s New York setting. It's really, really fun. And all of the fun slang that they use and the way of speaking. So beside that, we have Wicked Saints, Ruthless Gods, and Blessed Monsters. So this is a trilogy by Emily Duncan. It's sort of based on different, I think, Slavic folklore. It sort of has, a Slavic setting, sort of a Russia, Poland setting to my knowledge. And it follows a girl who is on one side of a war. So there's two kind of warring countries with two different magic systems, two different belief systems in essentially a religious war. And so on her side is very much, there are many gods that they pray to for different things, and she has the ability to speak to all of those gods, which is very uncommon. Typically, if there is a I don't remember what she's called exactly. Not a saint, not a priest. I don't recall exactly what they refer to her as. But she can speak to all the gods. Typically, when there have been others like her, they can speak to one of them. She can speak to all of them. The other country, the other side, does not believe in the old gods. They believe in blood magic. So they're using written spells and their own blood to call upon the magic that the gods give her when she speaks to them and asks for it. So we have these two warring countries and people on either side of it who have to come together, work together. But maybe they have ulterior motives and their own agendas at play. So it is a trilogy, and it has a lot of sort of dark imagery, sort of, if you think of like biblically accurate gods, that's definitely the vibe of what is sort of going on here. They're very, very fun. One of my favorite series. I will say, I don't think it ended very well. I think the third book sort of petered out for me, but these first two were something else. There was a time when those were coming out, so a lot of fun if that's something you're interested in. So beside that, we have Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom, both of these by Leigh Bardugo. So these are two that I haven't read yet. I did read the Grisha trilogy when it originally came out. They're over in a pile of books that are sort of my to donate pile. I don't think it's sort of a series that I really enjoyed at the time, but isn't one I feel like I need to revisit or hold on to. So Grisha trilogy's in that pile, but these two I've heard are excellent, and I know there's sort of a heist scenario at play and sort of a found family vibe, and I think that's always a lot of fun. Beside that, we have The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I have this whole trilogy, but I've loaned out the other two books to a friend, and their partner, so they're both reading those right now. The Cruel Prince is a fae YA fantasy. It's about a girl and her sister who are basically raised in the fairy world, but are always sort of seen as other and outcast, but both determined in their own ways to get power or be accepted in this world. And it's a very fun one. I'd recommend checking it out if that's something you're interested in. Here we also have a postcard of Ghostface holding a bunch of cats. I hope you enjoyed that. Put that back up here. You can sit there. Then we have Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor, and the other two books in the series, Days of Blood and Starlight and Dreams of Gods and Monsters. So many, many years ago I read this first one, and really, really loved it. Very later, a very long time later, I got the other two, and then did not get around to reading them. So it's one I'll have to, I think, revisit altogether. But a really, really interesting sort of mystery fantasy that's a lot of fun, very otherworldly. We'll scoot those over. Here we have Down Comes the Night by Alison Saft. So this is sort of a YA, it's a YA fantasy, sort of supernatural. It deals a lot with sort of science in a pastime that has supernatural elements, so sort of alchemy almost. It's a lot of fun. I wasn't a big fan of the ending. I thought the ending was sort of strange and stagnated, or like, I don't know. It had 3 different endings. I kept thinking it was going to end, and then more happened, and I was like, oh, I thought we were coming to a conclusion, but a fun one. Then we have A Far Wilder Magic by Alison Saft. This one I really enjoy. It's, I think it was described as like tender on the inside somewhere, and I think that's the best way to describe it. Yeah, achingly tender love story set against a deadly hunt in an atmospheric rich fantasy world that will sweep you away. So this one absolutely deals with alchemy as a plot point, and it's a really really nice story. I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed it more than the first one. So then we come to the bottom, and we do have a few friends here. We have the Pink Panther. We have Roadrunner. We got a leaf on her head. We have this little stuffed rabbit who I named Ruby many, many years ago. We have Pooh Bear, and we have Arthur, and they all sit here by the books because they are sort of this is my book crew here. So down here we have my books about film. I studied film in university, so I have a lot of books about movies. A lot of these are textbooks that I had in my classes, so we won't dig into these too much, I don't think. Just a quick review. So I have this book about Wes Anderson that I bought for myself, some film textbooks. So we have film history, which covers world film history. Film, a critical introduction from my first year course. It goes over a lot of basics about how to look at a film. So it talks about mise en scène, it talks about sound and color and all those things. American film, which we used in one of my Hollywood cinema or American cinema courses. And then we have, if I can read it in the dark here, Contemporary American Cinema. So another one. It was at 2 different courses covering 2 different eras of filmmaking. Well, really, 2 halves of a longer course, really. We have Popular Culture, a user's guide. So that was from an English course I took about reading popular culture. Really interesting course. We have Liquid Metal, a science fiction film reader. So that was from a sci-fi film course I took. A lot of essays collected there. Canadian National Cinema, from a Canadian National Cinema course I took. And then some of these were from film courses, some of these I got just for fun, just to read. So we have the Cinema of Wes Anderson, the Cinema of the Coen Brothers, the Cinema of David Lynch, and the Cinema of Steven Spielberg. So most of these are collected essays. Some of them are all written by one person, but a lot of them are different essays about different films by each of these directors. Then we have film censorship, the new Hollywood, action movies. We have this is from a writing course I took about how to write about film. And then we have this book about Sunrise, which is an early silent film. Really, really excellent film. I recommend checking out. And we have a book about M, which is the Fritz Lang German expressionist film from, I believe, 1930, 1931. Following that, we have Designing Graphic Props for Filmmaking. So this is by a designer who worked a lot with Wes Anderson on a lot of his movies. And it's all about making practical and designing practical props. So things like letters, newspapers, packaging, things that are tactile and designed. Following that, we have Fleabag the Scriptures. So this is the screenplays of every episode of the show Fleabag. It's a lot of fun to read. So sorry if you can hear my stomach. Following that, we have the Walt Disney Film Archives. So this is a book put out by Taschen, And they publish a lot of books like this of archives. So this covers basically the entire history of Walt Disney, every film from, 20 something to present. Really, really interesting. They basically went through the whole Disney archives and pulled out a lot of archival sketches and photos and things that haven't been previously released or published. Really, really interesting. We have The Hidden Art of Disney's Mid-Century. So this is a book about a lot of the artists who worked in Disney between the 50s and the 60s. So a lot of concept artists, including Mary Blair, who's one of my favorites. Really, really interesting to look at and see some of the origins of the movies they made in that time and the art style. And then we have a book about Edgar Degas, who's my favorite Impressionist painter. And then here in the corner behind Hedwig, we have the complete Harry Potter series. So I kind of keep it tucked away because I feel like Harry Potter has that nostalgia factor of I'll hold on to these, but not a big supporter of J.K. Rowling. And by that I mean she's a TERF, and that's not okay. I have this little stone. I don't remember where this came from, but I've had it forever. And it says Fluffy on it, my 3-headed dog who guards the Philosopher's Stone, and this plush Hedwig that I've had since I was a kid. So I'm gonna carefully stand up here. I'll just review where we've been in these past few videos. So there is the full bookshelf. I hope you've enjoyed our little tour, and I hope you have an excellent night.